Hello everyone and welcome to the reintroduction of the Fleet Heavy Escort Carrier Armitage class. A reintroduction because I forgot a few things in the first one and I just changed the build a little bit. Didn't really like how that one went anyways, so we're getting a new one. So jumping right into it, the loadout on this ship, I went with advanced fleet phasers. We've got a dual beam bank up front, dual cannons instead of dual heavies. The reason because you do the same DPS, but you fire more frequently, so there's more chances to proc. Also went with the experimental proton weapon and the gravimetric photon torpedo. And the reason why I went with this proton weapon is because I have the 3-piece bonus on it. So if you look at the 2-piece, you get 22.9% photon projectile weapon damage. That's pretty awesome. A 3% critical chance boost, even better. And you can use fire at will with the experimental proton weapon, which doesn't apply here, but in some cases that's pretty nice. And then the 3-piece particle stabilizers, you get 10% critical chance with photon projectile weapons and 10% critical severity. So this photon launcher here is my most powerful weapon. It does at least as much in any STF as both the dual beam bank and the dual cannons, which is insane. So to add to that, I decided to go with the biomolecular photon mine launcher, which I just happened to get out of a rep drop, so why not? The kinetic cutting beam, because it goes on every build, and an advanced fleet phaser turret, which in PvP I would probably swap that for an current mine launcher. For the deflector, impulse, warp, and shields, it's the Dyson set, simply because of the bonuses. I mean, it's not bad gear. You can see the stats on the deflector here. It boosts your shields, your structural integrity, power insulators, all those are good. Particle generators, doesn't matter. The impulse engines I quite like. You get 2.5 added to your engines, shields, and auxiliary. So it's a nice power level boost. Boost your turn rate a little bit, and you get a good boost to flight speed. I think it's about average, but the warp core is okay. It's not a bad warp core. It works real well on this ship. You get bonus shield power, and bonus shield power bonus shield power, whatever it is. You can have more shield power basically. You can go up to 130 instead of 125, which sometimes that does kick in with emergency power to shields. It also boosts your ship's power transfer rate, and I do use beam overload, so having some little boosts in there for that is nice. And adds 7.5% of your weapon's power to your shield's power, which gives my shields a huge chunk of their bonus power. Everything else pretty much doesn't matter. I don't have any points in my driver coil skill. Shield power buff, I almost never use that. And the regenerative shield array, which has a super low capacity, but it reduces all energy damage by 10%, anti-proton by 20, which is great against the Undine and the Voth. And there's the hyper-regenerative shield array ability, which gives you plus 3600 shield generation per facing to shields, and it reduces the damage to them by 67% for 10 seconds, and that procs a lot. So these shields are virtually indestructible in a sense. They will go down, but they like to stay up, and that's very nice, especially on an escort, because you've got only I think it's a 1 for your shield modifier. It might be 0.9 still for the fleet, but you don't get much. Your shields are paper thin. And then devices, I just throw some batteries in. For the engineering consoles, I put the torpedo point defense. This console is awesome. You can fire 48 photon torpedoes at 8 different targets, 6 apiece. So it is great for clearing spam or frigates or birds of preys, fighters, things like that. I've also got the enhanced neutronium, so I went with plus turn to boost the turn rate a little bit. It's a given console, you should have at least one of these, or any neutronium. Anyways, it doesn't have to be a fleet one on a build. And then I went with the hydrodynamic compressor from the Undine rep, because it boosts your engine and auxiliary power, which is always good, and your starship targeting systems, which accuracy leads into critical chance, and I really like that. And again, you've got a flight turn rate increase of 23.1%, which is helpful in an escort, especially even though I'm only using one cannon. The torpedo only has a small firing arc too, and these fire a lot, and I'll show you why in a moment. So for science consoles, I've already been talking about them, but I didn't go with any science consoles. They're pretty useless on an escort. So I went with the 0-point energy conduit, because these are all good things. I mean, you get 1.8 power to all your subsystems, you get 19.7% boost to your power insulators, which is great against the Borg and their tachyon beams, and a 1.6 critical chance, which is always good when you want more firepower, more criticals. You need that. And the assimilated module, because again, 2-piece Borg set is awesome, and this console is awesome. I use this in every build, because you get more critical chance, any little bit helps. You get 9.2 critical severity, which is important, because those criticals need to do more damage, of course. 5.1 hull repair, which is nice. 5 weapons power setting, which is great as well. And I don't care about graviton generators. Again, it's an escort. It doesn't do any sciencey things. For tactical consoles, I went with 3 vulnerability locators, 2 are plus phaser, and 1 is plus photon. And then to get the 2-piece and soon 3-piece Undine bonus, I went with the multi-conduit energy relay. And it's pretty good. I mean, it increases radiation damage, which helps with my biomolecular photon mines. Photon projectile damage, which is just important. And also phaser damage. And with the 2-piece bonus on this set, you get, again, more phaser damage, a 2% increased chance for biomolecular incubation to happen. Man, I need some water. Hold on a second. That is better. And soon, once I get the heavy bio-turret, you get a heavy barrage ability with that 3-piece, which affects foes in a 5-kilometer... I don't know if it's a sphere, if it's just anywhere around you. I'll have to see how that works out. But all of your enemies that are hit with that get hit with the biomolecular incubation, which is nice. It does a bit more radiation damage to them. I don't know if it does anything else, but every little bit counts. And then for the hangar, I am using Yellowstone runabouts. I've tried Scorpions, I've tried Tholian Widows, both elites. I don't like the elite Obelisk Swarmers, so I haven't tried those. And I've run with advanced shield repair units. These by far do the most damage. They survive the longest out of all of them. They can tractor enemies, they can slow them with chronoton mines, and they can slow them with eject Tetraron warp plasma. They're not smart about which ones they stop with the warp plasma. Sometimes it's just that they go off in the middle of nowhere. Other times they get a cube or some spheres, or so, you know. It's just nice to have it the times when it does work. Next up are the traits. So obviously for space I am running all space traits. I love that you can interchange these now on the, well, not on the fly, but anytime you're outside of combat. It's really great. For a few reasons. One being, I was able to make mines useful. I bought the Hot Pursuit trait off of the exchange for 3 times what it was worth just 2 weeks ago. But that's what happens when something becomes useful that once wasn't. And it increases the chase distance of all mines by 100%. So mines have a standard chase distance of 3 kilometers, which is nearly useless. I mean, you pretty much gotta be parked on the nose of your enemy to make them effective. Now they have a 6 kilometer distance, and that's a little different. That's more like having a high yield torpedo with a 360 degree firing arc. Because even if there's some enemies behind you swarming about, you can get rid of those with the mines, but if they're in front of you, they'll still go forward. They still move slow, a bit faster than a high yield, but they take a second to kick in. So it's awesome. My mines do an obscene amount of damage, and there's a space reputation trait which also helps that too. And again, they're right up there with the photons. They do more than the cannons or the dual beam banks. Now, I got the living hull trait. I didn't have this when I made the first video. I do now. From the surface tension featured episode. So it gives you a slight boost to hull regeneration. Outside of combat, it worked out to be about 13%. So in combat, about 7-ish, thereabout, percent per minute. Of course, that's at a full crew. So it's okay. It's a free trait, and it's better than what I was using before, which was Astrophysicist, and that boosts all things that I don't need on this ship. I just went with all the other standard ones for a human. So there's crippling fire, so my critical hits will reduce the accuracy of my enemies, which is great because there's a lot of them. There's Hot Pursuit again. Last ditch effort, which basically means go down fighting makes you invulnerable with 100% damage resistance. Accurate to boost my accuracy again, bleeding into critical chance, which is what this build is all about basically. Techie to increase hull repair, especially on an escort. You need as much help as you can get. Same with living hull. Elusive to boost defense, so I'm not hit as much, which is nice. Waste as much as their shots, but make as many of yours count. And Warp Theorist to boost my warp core potentials. I don't know if it's a huge boost to power levels, but again, every little bit helps. And again, improving the power transfer rate, which helps recover from beam overload. For my space reputation traits, this is an amazing one. Omega Kinetic Shearing. It basically adds a 40% area of effect, or a shield penetrating area of effect damage to your torpedoes. So no matter what torpedo you use, it has a 40% shield penetration, hence the 40% damage bonus. And it says right here, they deal to their target's hull as a shield penetrating damage over time. And it happens over 6 seconds. So you'll see that cripple enemies. It's not good with generators when a couple of stray mines happen to hit one because it'll die. But it's nice to everything else. So went with Fortified Hull to give me more hull strength. Precision to increase critical chance, because again, that's what this build is all about. And enhanced shield systems to boost my shield capacity, because escorts have next to none, as we know. And then I went with the Nakura refracting Tetrion beam thing, and the quantum singularity manipulation, because it's nice to have a little cloak for 3 seconds. It doesn't necessarily save your butt, but it helps. It'll get the aggro off you for a little bit anyways. So all this with my skill tree means that my weapons training is maxed, my attack patterns are pretty good, they're at 84. My weapons damage is maxed, torpedo damage is at 84, because torpedoes do a lot of damage anyways, and maneuvers are at 84 because they only really boost your defense if you're moving, and having to keep something in your forward arc a lot, if they stay still, you tend to just slowly creep up or stop or creep backwards, so there's no point in really boosting that to the max. Targeting systems, though, is boosted to the max, and then some. So I've got 116 in there. Energy weapon specialization is of course maxed to increase criticals, and it's boosted a little bit. I got 54 out of it with projectile weapons. I was running out of skill points at that point. There are some science skills being spent on this though. Shield emitters to improve shield healing, and as you can see, 117 overmaxed. Power insulators to resist that shield drain and energy drain, because I hate when the Borg do that to me. So 57, it's not much, but it helps. They only get about a quarter of my shields, or a third now. And improving my shield systems was important too, so that's maxed. All the other science stats are irrelevant. Hull repair, I like this one at 134. And structural integrity at 125. You'll see this ship's got a really nice hull for an escort. Subsystem repair at 124. My subsystems never go offline anymore. I mean, there's the odd time a Tholian can take them out, but it's only for a second anyways. I've got my warp core efficiency up to maximum, and that's not just from skills, that's also from some bridge officers. I've improved my power transfer rate, got that to 45, and that's simply the passive, not even trying to, ways that I've shown you. Impulse thrusters, because I need that speed and turn, so they're boosted up to 84. Warp core potential is over boosted to 109, because just having a flat boost to power levels is much more important than efficiency. Hull plating, again, you get hit with more energy weapons than torpedoes and stuff, so that's boosted to 84. And whereas you'll see my armor reinforcements is only 54. And then engine and shield performance 84 and 99 respectively. Auxiliary performance only 74, because I don't really fly science ships, and science abilities, I mean, auxiliary power really helps them, don't get me wrong, but they don't do as much damage as weapons, so that's the route I go as a tactical officer. And starship weapon performance, obviously that's maxed. So, you've got a crew recovery rate standard of 50, but you've got a crew complement of 200 on the heavy escort carrier. That's really nice. And a power transfer rate of 144 is decent. Now, for the hull, 51.2k. That's really good. For an escort, even a cruiser getting that is still pretty decent. With a hull repair rate of 135% per minute. That's also really good for an escort. Of course, that depends on the crew being alive, but shield regeneration is 293.6. It finally updated itself, and that's not bad. But the shield strength is pretty low at 6.8k. And then resistances, they all sit around 26.1 and 23.7 for kinetic. Our attack stats, I really like seeing these. Accuracy, the bonus accuracy is 27.6% with a critical chance of 20.4. And of course, all things said and done, that turns out to be about 30% for energy weapons and 40% for mines. Holy crap. I'm just putting it out there, that is a lot of damage. My critical severity needs boosts. It's only at 77.9, but that's okay. It's not bad. Things still die really fast. Flight speed is nice at 32, and the turn rate is 36.6. So it turns like this, which is very good for most of the firepower coming from within a 90-degree arc. So, For bridge officers, I have it set up as you have to. There's no universal stations on this. So for Commander Tactical, I've got TAC Team 1, Cannon Rapid Fire 1, High Yield 3, Cannon Rapid Fire 3. So those are awesome. I love having those two. I've got another TAC team, so I can constantly keep my shields distributed. I've got Beam Overload 2, which works on both the experimental proton weapon, which I hate when it does it on that one, because it's much more powerful on the dual beam bangs, but it happens. I'm not good with timing energy weapons and mines and stuff like that, as you see in my combat videos. Then I went with Torp Spread, just to round it out. I don't know, it was better than, say, target shields, which fall in 2 seconds. And then for my Lieutenant Commander Engineering, we've got 2 emergency powered shields, so I can constantly keep that going, which boosts not only my power levels, but reduces damage to shields. And auxiliary power to dampers too, because, I mean, it keeps your crew alive longer. You don't get pulled into gravity wells, you can't be pushed away with tractor beam repulsors. It's easier to break tractor beams, but it doesn't actually break them. And it gives you a kinetic damage resistance rating, and a nice one at that. And then for science, I went with Transfer Shield Strength 1 and Hazard Emitters 2. And because I run at a good amount of auxiliary, they're both pretty good. Not great, but I tend to stay alive in combat. For my duty officers, we've got 3 torpedo officers. They all have a 20% chance to reduce the recharge time of torpedoes by 5 seconds. What that means is 60% of the time, my torpedoes fire without doing a high yield or a torp spread, mind you, 3 seconds after. 40% of the time, and 20% of the time, they fire instantly after, which is really nice. And 20% of the time with a torp spread or high yield, it's only a 15-second recharge. I also went with a beam overload officer, an energy weapons officer, who has a 30% chance that beam overload attacks ignore 35% of your target shields for 4 seconds. So, facing cubes, TAC cubes, that is actually pretty helpful. I don't know how much it happens, but... And then I've got a Warp Core Engineer, who has a 20% chance on the use of any emergency power ability to boost your power levels by 25. This kicks in a lot. So when that happens, my engines are nearly at 100, my auxiliary is nearly at 100, my shields are at 130, and my weapons are at 125. Great power level boost. And I added a nurse for this one because actually it's a pretty helpful duty officer to use. It increases your crew recovery rate in combat when your crew is below 75%, and it boosts it by 200%. So, when I've got only 75 or less of my crew, 75%, they recover at 150% per minute, I believe it is. Yes, 150% per minute. So it keeps them alive real well. I see a lot of my crew a lot of the time now using that in combat. For power levels, passively I have gone with 85 or 125 with engines, or weapons, not engines. The shields are at 30, boosted to 71. Engines 45, boosted to 74. And auxiliary is at 40, boosted to 66. And auxiliary power is nice for, again, those heals and getting my runabouts out faster. And for my HUD, everybody has their own way that they're going to rearrange their HUD. I grouped it all in one place I like to be able to just quickly glance and I can see how much my shields are left, how much my hull is left, what's going on with my power levels, what abilities need to be selected. Now, something that you've heard in combat, as you've heard me mashing the spacebar pretty much constantly, is that I've used the space keybinds and the HUD layout from the Hilbert guide. It's the only thing I've taken from a guide, but it is by far the most useful thing I've found. So it binds your tray number 7 is bound now to my spacebar. So if you use this ability, it would do the same to you. What that means is, as you hit spacebar, it just moves on down the list. So you can have your entire Alpha Strike and your Beta Strike all in this tray, and it's all accessible through one key on the keyboard. For the rest, I use an Nostromo, or not, well, I do use an Nostromo, but I'm currently borrowing a friend's Naga, which is much nicer. So I've grouped the most useful power items on the first tray, and then the still useful, and because I have an ability to use alt abilities on this mouse, but not control, or control not alt, sorry, I just put the secondary abilities, things that have longer recharge times, or, you know, like go down fighting or fleet support. So, jumping a little, well, we'll talk about a couple of the abilities I've used, and well, no, they all pretty much make sense. So, for my duty officers, or my bridge officers rather, I needed ones that had space traits. So, I went with a human tactical officer who has leadership. That gives you a small hull regeneration boost, and it also gives you a sizable boost to your subsystem repair. That's why mine is at 117 instead of 99. There we go. I've also gone with a Romulan operative for one of my tactical officers because you get 1.5% critical chance and 3.8% critical severity, and the recharge speed for cloaking doesn't matter because I don't use cloak. And then I used a superior Romulan operative bridge officer to get plus 2% critical chance and plus 5% critical severity, which is really, it's not a big part, but it is a helpful part of my 20% critical severity. Then with my engineer, I went for a liberated Borg, so she's got the efficient trait, which adds 7.5% to your warp core efficiency. And for my science officer, oh, look at that, a Saurian with efficiency as well. So now all my bridge officers are helping to boost my space stats and my space powers, and that's really nice. Now, none of them were cheap. The Romulan operative ones, you have to have access to that through a fleet embassy, and then they cost fleet credits and dilithium. The Saurian, he was, I think, 3 million EC. He was not cheap. Used, I think it was 500 Zen for the liberated Borg. She is in here. Yep, 500 Zen. But the human was cheap. If you don't have a lot of EC, fill up your bridge with humans, because you can get that leadership trait on any human. So, or possibly any human. I don't know if I have any other ones. No, I don't. But you see it all over the place, and they're like 200 EC. So, if you have to compromise, go with humans. You get that hull repair, and I mean, you wouldn't have to put skill points into subsystem repair or nearly as much if you had a crew full of humans. So lastly, we're just going to take a look at the ship. I've turned off all the visuals of my sets and stuff. I don't like how they look on this ship. And I think it looks very good. There's a lot of customizability. This is a ship where you can actually change the colors on. It doesn't work on all of them, I found, but the lighting is not good over here. Let's go over near Earth and see if that's any better. No, because our space dock is blocking us now. But it is a good looking ship. And as another YouTuber pointed out, if you really look at it and compare it to a Battlestar, it does kind of look like one. So, because I absolutely love Battlestar Galactica, I think that is one of the best series I've ever seen, I've named this the Galactica. Because it is also a carrier, so there's still birds going up in the air. And you can even see on my registry, it's supposed to be NX, I don't know why it's NCC, but it is registered as 930075. And if you remember, the Galactica is Battlestar number 75. So it seemed appropriate. And I don't know, 93 is a cool number. So, final thoughts. It's an amazing ship. I've also got a Fleet Defiant and an Alachi Escort to compare it to. And with those you get all the kind of Lieutenant Commander possibilities. This being the Engineer, the Escort having a Lieutenant Commander Psi, and the Defiant having Lieutenant Commander Tactical. I really can't say if I like it more than either of those ships. I definitely like it as much as them. They all seem to do about the same damage, they all arrive at it in different ways, and they all have something to really say, pick me, like attack pattern Omega. That's great, breaks tractor beams, and it boosts your damage. So my Defiant possibly does more damage. But having aux to dampeners keeps your crew alive longer, keeps you alive longer, and helps you break tractor beams. Or having a gravity well means you can be a control artist. So they all have their areas where they work out good, where they work out not so good. It always depends on your team. I've done a lot of parsing with all the ships, and they're capable of anywhere. Now, since I've refitted the Galactica with the experimental proton weapon, it has not done an STF where it's fallen below 3 million damage, but they all do about 2.5 to most I've seen is 6.2 million damage. And the DPS is just based on how long it takes for you to do the STF, so it changes constantly. I've broken 10k, most of the time I don't, depends on if I'm pugging or not. If I'm not pugging and I've got a really good team, can be in the mid-10s, could be at like 15. So, it's a great ship. It's got more customizability than any of the other ones I own or have flown. So if you really like to customize your ship, if you like something you can really work with, if you just love photon torpedoes because of that torpedo point defense console, it is an amazing ship to get. I definitely recommend it. I think it's better than the Andorians. It's been my main ship that I've been flying mostly because of the bug with the power trays right now, but it's not a bad ship at all. And if you're thinking of getting it, and you're comparing it to the Fleet Defiant and the Andorian Escorts, I can say go with the one that you think looks best. If you build it right, they will all do the same damage. They all have really great reasons to get them. They're all really great ships. I loved DS9s and I loved the Defiant, so In a lot of ways, I like it more because of nostalgia. But the heavy escort carrier can launch these runabouts. I think this is probably better for PvP. PvE does not matter though. And if you've watched all this and listened to all my rambling, thank you very much. And have a good one, guys. See you next time.